Hi everyone and welcome to our webinar. Today we'll be looking at quizzes and assessments and using question banks. First of all, I'll just introduce myself. My name's Grace. I've been with EP for about 2.5 years. Prior to that, I was a teacher of maths and science. I guess my passion during teaching was always to get the best out of students, and coming across to EP, it allows me to continue that passion, really working with teachers and showing them how they can use EP to really maximise students' potential.
Wonderful. Thank you, Grace. My name is Kirsty. I've been with EP for about 3.5 years, and I've come from a background as a secondary senior science teacher with focus in chemistry. I used EP assessments quite a lot and developed quite a passion for it at a school-wide level, including our subject today when I was helping manage digital learning, e-learning and digital-based assessments for external purposes such as NCEA in New Zealand, but also junior topics and exams, and covering not just science but other subjects too. So it did become a bit of a passion of mine to help manage and run assessments at any level, from a small class up to a whole school.
Nice. If we move on, here we have EP's differentiated learning cycle. Now, most teachers in their practices, they will touch on some of these different areas of the learning cycle, but with EP's help, it just makes the process complete. So we start with readiness assessments, moving into the targeted explicit direction and instruction, filling in students' gaps, and then a revising off that and a summative assessment at the end.
Yeah, I really like this because I feel it really speaks to how most of us teach, just partly in that sort of workflow state and that sort of flowchart state, but also kind of allowing for the fact that this cycle in the middle is something that we just naturally do. You know, you teach, you reflect, you find and fill in the gaps, and however many times you need to do that before you roll on through to the revision and the summative. So I personally really like that the middle allows for that purple section, the instruction, whether that's targeted to very specific needs of the student or explicit to, well, the whole class. And then the practice part is going to be, you know, maybe work you set for your students, but then also the independent and differentiated stuff. And that sort of bit in the middle, the assessment is kind of the data and the insights. The snapshots of what do students know right now, and what do they really need to succeed before we can almost like exit out of that wheel and that cycle to the next stage. So today, this is going to be more of our focus, isn't it, Grace?
Absolutely. So we're just going to take you through the different types of assessments available on EP. First of all, we have our readiness assessments, and they're basically our diagnostic tools. It really allows us to get an idea of where students are at now and the gaps that they have, and moving towards identifying the process and the progress that we need to make with students. After that comes the formative assessments, which can be anything from those exit cards, student reflections, and those quick quizzes. EP has an amazing feature which allows us to combine questions from the lessons, take us through that formative assessment journey, and have a look at student progress. And lastly, we have the summative assessment, which gives us an overall view of students' progress at the end of a course or a unit of work.
Yeah. I know most teachers, when they think assessment, jump straight to the summative. And for many of us, that is our entry point into these assessments. But my personal favorite's always been the formative. Even like you mentioned, those quick quizzes and those like entry and exit tickets and cards. I used like the 10-question quick quizzes quite often. The reason I started using it was really just for a way to use EP that was much quicker and more simpler for the students, like helped and keeps them engaged and give them variety. Absolutely. But then I think I stayed with it because it gave me really useful information.
Oh, you're absolutely right. It keeps them engaged, and it does give teachers that information to inform their next steps.
Oh, so I'm going to switch on over to what the stuff we're talking about here, some of these assessments look like an EP. So I'm just going to change my window a wee bit here, and so you can see my bias comes up here, but I've got a bunch of science classes here. This is my wheelhouse and my comfort zone. But we do have subjects where we don't necessarily have all three of those types of assessments pre-made, or teachers want something a little more unique and niche, like what I need right now in terms of drawing on a range of skills. So we're going to use one of our sort of non-core or non-main fully covered subjects. I mean, because we cover science and maths, the subjects that we're familiar with. There's also English, languages, social sciences, humanities. Is quite a range there. And the range of year level coverage will also depend on your area you're in too. So I've just come to the EP library and chosen digital technology because I know this is a subject where we have just a few topic themes here where they only contain lessons, there's no assessments, just so we can take a look at what it's like to build and curate an assessment, and I guess why we would even do that. So I guess while I'm just going through and going into my content and creating a new assessment, are there any reasons you can think of, Grace, like why would you want to, or when have you in the past actually gone and made your own assessments?
Absolutely. So a starting area where I always used assessments was that check-in or pre-test diagnostic. So most subjects tend to build year on year, and it's a really good way of starting a unit of work, creating a really short quiz that's going to give you that picture of where all the students in your class are. There may be areas where you think they were weak, but in actual fact, that's not an area of weakness, and they're really on top of that. But running a really quick diagnostic quiz shows you and informs you where you need to spend that time. Yeah.
So we've got a couple options, and part of the reason why I've come into here is I might be thinking of what particularly I want to do. In terms of what skills or information do I want from students. So you can completely go from blank and create your own questions. What I'm going to be doing is making it a little easier for myself. There's a small bank of lessons there. There's no assessment, but I can go and add existing questions and start to choose from these folders here, like what do the students know about coding with Scratch? So I can go through and select any questions or areas I want. So I might just grab a few quick questions just to show examples. You can also preview or even select all, but maybe I'll just show what previewing one or two looks like. So I can choose banks of questions,
Previewing it gives you that opportunity to maybe more tailor it to your students. So if you see some questions that you might think they're not exactly phrased the way you have taught it, so you can just take those out, or even possibly if you haven't quite covered that at the moment, it's completely tailored by you to your students.
Yeah, you can see I'm just kind of going through, oh yeah, I like that question. I thought this one probably doesn't tell me as much, so maybe I'll give that a skip. But overall, I've got a bank of 17 questions so far, so I'm just going to start with that. And what I'll do is it will folder them up based on the topic I brought them from. So here's my coding questions, and I can see here's all the questions I pulled in. These little lightning bolts tell me they'll be automatically marked. So I pulled in auto marking questions. So the idea is information without the marking load.
Absolutely. And such a time saver, and you really still get that idea of what your students know, but it hasn't taken as much time as if you were to collect it and mark it on your own. So I love that.
Yeah. And the other thing I love too is because I brought them in from an existing lesson on EP, this folder here has a little tag at the bottom, and the questions are attached back to their original lesson as well. So if students don't do very well on Introduction to Coding, it's attached to that lesson, and that's going to give them that follow-up recommendation. Whereas if they do much better at concurrent events, which is tagged to a different lesson, it's not going to recommend the things they do well or but it is going to pick up the folders and sections and areas where they need to work on next and point them in that direction with the follow-up recommendations.
The other good thing about the analysis tags is that if you run a check-in midway through the topic, it also compares the analysis tags, which we'll tell you about in a little bit, but it allows you to see the progress and the growth of your students, which is really great.
Yeah. And if teachers want, like, I was the kind of teacher who got a bit more niche on these things, but if teachers get a bit, want a bit more detail and a bit more tagging in comparison, you can add your own tags as well. So you can add new ones, and these can just be identifiers like curriculum level, year level, particular topic outcomes, or just identifiers, and you can link them back to content in EP if you want to add more skills for recommendation, but you don't have to. You can just put them purely as identifying tags as well. I might put, for example, NZC4 as a tag, and that lets me know that these were all curriculum level 4 questions in this file. So it might give me an indication of what improvement are they making if I grab some from different curriculum levels as well. So
while Kirsty mentioned NZ, it's the same situation for the Australian curriculum as well. It's just in this instant, Kirsty is looking at the NZ curriculum. Well, she was referring to the NZ curriculum, but it's totally the same for all the Australian and the New South Wales NESA curriculums as well.
Yeah, so what tag would you use would be the equivalent? So New Zealand curriculum level 4 for us is about our year 9 students, or which would be your year 8s. Yep.
New South Wales would work off the NESA, but other states in Australia would work off the AC version 9. And it's all, all of those are available to you no matter where you are. Yeah, so the things like, NESA and AC means little to me, means much more to you. Same with me using NZC. We all have those codes that we know what they mean to us, so that gives me valuable information. So we want to make sure the codes that we put in are meaningful to us as well. Absolutely.
So I put up a bank here.
And knowing that the codes are there is really great for teachers, because you're working towards those outcomes and the students' achievement of those outcomes.
Yeah, and there was one good way I've seen tagging done as well. Like I put curriculum, but I've seen teachers do things like with some of the drag and drop. If they are more close-in style questions, or they're more targeted to literacy style questions, they might put a literacy or a numeracy tag on there. So they can, across a range of questions, look at particular literacy and numeracy skills within a topic like digital, where they still need those skills as well.
Yeah, and that's so important, because often a school will have a literacy focus across all subjects, and you can keep track of that using EP.
Yeah. So what I've got there is those quick questions are just, here's my bank from EP. I can still go through and edit them if I want to change them. But the reason I might go through the effort of making this as a sort of pre-built assessment rather than just using the quick quiz function is sometimes, especially in those diagnostics and in some of those summatives as well, you do need one or two really targeted higher level or deeper thinking writing questions. So that instead of, I've got some quick questions at the top, but I'm going to try and pop in here a more like written response, where I can have, here's my bank of questions, but now I have maybe my own writing question in a doc or a PDF somewhere, and I can rebuild it on EP just to ideally reduce the marking load. The quick questions take care of all the skills, but then here I've got one where I mark it manually and have a really good feedback and depth focus as well.
Yeah, it's a really nice balance, yet most of it's marked for you, which is super.
Yeah. There's 3 actions. Putting in a plausible question for digital technology here. And then, so teachers can bring in their question. I usually had a nice bank of questions or a previous paper test that I might recreate. sometimes often putting in, like if I'm talking about a sprite, I might put in an image of my sprite if I have it handy. Might be a good time to show. We also have the handy media gallery there too. So if I put in sprite, there we go. We've got our little scratch cat from Sprite. Pop them in there. It's quite big, so I might resize him down. There we go. So I've got my question, and then one thing that comes in differently in these extended response ones is I've got the option for students to put in open-ended long answer, where I can pop in a model answer, pick up any keywords, give the students sentence starters or a table to fill in with the prompt. But either way there, I've just got an open-ended space, and this is where I can really look at more in-depth answer marking. Have you used, in conjunction with this writing response, any of these other tools at the same time as well?
With a maths background, the working formula bar is a really good tool. It's really simple for students to use, and again, you get that track of their working out, and it allows you to see what's their process, is it what it should be, and then you can give them some feedback to help them expand that particular area.
Yeah, one that's a bit hard to get into showing how to set up a working formula today, but I did like, as a chemistry teacher, there is the chemical and science version too, and I did like how it allowed students the option to use handwriting.
Absolutely.
If they have the screen as well, because especially for chemical drawings, handwriting came in handy, and I've seen younger students really enjoy the handwriting, almost like magically converting into formula for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Another good tool is the audio recorder, so students can record their response instead of having to type it, and sometimes kids like that just for a little bit of a variation.
Yeah, variation, and also great accessibility and allowing for multiple modes of assessment as well. So students can write. If writing's a struggle for any reason, they can speak. And that uploader tool is then useful there as well, because maybe they've created a resource or a video recording that they can then link in. So maybe you don't want them accessing documents or images, but I know I had students where they drew or wrote something, but I still wanted to mark it in EP, so I got them to upload an image of their written response, so I could still just see it. Yeah,
really good for that.
And then so that allows us to create any question that we want or need. And so we've got now a really nice pairing of imported questions pre-built by EP and our own manually written one, where again we can add tags. This one was about coding, so for example, it was about coding in Scratch. I can use that existing tag if that still applies, and I can even do things like bring in another coding tag here. Maybe I want to go to this one's maybe at a bit of a higher level, but might be some lessons that apply and appeal there that I can add in to those tags and start to bank them up. So I'd expect a more complex question might have touch on more points, so it could be quite useful to have a few different things in there. Don't forget to save in the end, of course. But there it is, and it's ready for me to preview, which is a great way to test it out, see how it functions and works for you and your students, and also ready to assign if it's good to go and I want to check my students' readiness on coding, and maybe do it as a readiness assessment, maybe then do it again later on as a summative and give a good comparison of them.
Absolutely. And although you may create this, it's still shareable within other teachers in your department. And before you get to that step, you can also get the other teachers to have a go and give you that feedback and work collaboratively with your team to get it just as you want it.
I mean, that's great, because I created it here in my content, which is private to me. Good if I need to keep it hidden or I want other people to not really see something I'm midway working on. But you can do things like move it to the My Schools content to share it with other teachers. You can also grab it and share the URL, either by grabbing the URL from the top or doing copy the teacher link, giving teachers the link so they can test it out.
Yeah.
They can experience it like a student, and also then, assign it for themselves or make their own copies if they want to create a different variation or version of it. I think that last step then, it would be, we kind of went through the process here of talking about and creating assessments, but when it comes to giving them to students, we've kind of talked about different ways we can give assessments. So I've moved over to assessments. There's two types, and we've kind of talked a bit about both. What's the difference really that you see mostly in using a quiz versus an assessment?
I think the main difference is assessments are pre-built by EP, whereas quizzes are built by the teacher from the questions in the content library. So with the pre-built assessments, the green, they will be questions that students won't have seen before. So they're really good for that summative assessment at the end. But there's always that chance if you're using a quiz, they may have done a question or two before.
Yeah.
But it's still really good. Like, my philosophy was always the more kids practice, the better they go, really. And the more they understand things, especially with a maths and science background. So even if they do see a question again, they are still showing you their knowledge and where they're at on that learning spectrum.
Yeah. And the one thing I always like to note with, they've seen the questions before, but I've selected 10 lessons worth of questions. So I've got a big bank of 91. If I want to do those quick entry or exit tickets and do a subset of like 10 questions, I mean, every student's going to get a different 10 out of 91. And
Absolutely.
they're going to need to do it quite a few repeat times to see lots of questions, or even potentially see ones they've already done in the lesson and get that repeat exposure. So
absolutely. And that really gives you that ability to use it as a diagnostic at the start, a check-in in the middle, and as you see fit on the frequency, but it really allows for that comparison and that analysis of growth.
Yeah, because I know one thing I like to do, especially maybe do 3 attempts and, run it as some entries and exits, or allow students to, beat their best attempt and try and work on improvement and review. But I've seen teachers do, they leave it open for a term and do lots of attempts and prompt students to revisit it so they can track that improvement over time. I know I personally liked to do maybe 3 to 5 attempts and then make a copy of it later and repeat the same one later. Almost keep like them separate in time. Yeah.
I've seen a fair few teachers, they'll put something high like the 99 attempts, and they'll use it more as a revision quiz. So each time a student comes back to do the quiz in the lead up to end of term assessments, every time they do it, their development areas will change. And so the recommendations that they get will be appropriate for where their weaknesses still are. So that's a really useful aspect of the quizzes, giving the students to work where they need to work.
Yeah, and I think that comes back to that intention of where are you at on the wheel? Like, if you're working purely within I want to look at readiness, I want to track against summative, like if you're working over time through a unit, you might wish to have something very distinctly for the beginning and then make a separate copy.
Absolutely.
And keep them separate in time. But if you're sort of in the middle working towards formative and revision and improvement, then having one thing where students can keep iterating and going through and going through that cycle again and again, having that one assessment or that one quiz where students get lots of attempts at it with a bigger selection of questions or a good range of questions, and then seeing those recommendations get updated and changed as their needs and what they're learning changes as well.
Absolutely. And it allows the student and the teacher to see their growth. And kids like that. Kids like to know that they're making some improvements. And it's so important for teachers to have that information as well, to know where each student in their class of maybe 30 is sitting and progressing.
Absolutely. Like if we look at here, one of these sample reports, you can see for something that's a readiness assessment, we can see where students are at the beginning and right down to the individual level, like where are they at each part of a topic.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I mean, for me, this was the goal part when I came to, as a class, where are the strengths and weaknesses? So,
Absolutely.
you know, looking and saying, okay, the structure of DNA is not looking so hot, but in particular, okay, which students are really needing to work on this or have been given this recommended lesson. So maybe I can unpack this lesson with this group a bit more.
Mm.
You know, it gives me a few things that I can really act on in terms of strengths and weaknesses in the class, recommended lessons, mistakes that I can work through with them. So
Yep.
I might be able to find some of the questions that have been really struggled with the most on students, bring it up, and you can see mistakes that have been made. You can go over the most difficult questions with students.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The next bit down, the per question breakdown, I used to like that as well, because it shows you, if you click onto a question, it shows you each student's incorrect response. And I really used to like that because it'd highlight any misconceptions that are happening or any common errors that students are making. And again, you could address that with that little group or with the whole class, but it really informed me of where students are struggling.
Yeah. And I don't know if you did this too, but I did like to use this in front of students, but I would be careful that I usually zoomed my screen in to cut off the student names on the left.
Absolutely.
Or even do my extender screen so where part of the screen sticks out. But, you know, just knowing that you probably want to, depends on your class. Some students are okay with that, but a lot of mine were a bit more sensitive to their names on the board.
Of course, especially if it's something like this with errors, totally agree.
Absolutely.
Hide the names, but you can still go through it as a class. Or if you just want to run a lesson, you know what particular spots you need to focus on.
Yeah, even doing things like, just so anyone knows that you can just get rid of the names on the side, just sort of cut them out, but also even grab screen grabs of, here's some examples from our class of, you know, some common mistakes that I noticed again that we can, you know, maybe talk about why these mistakes came about, talk about ways to avoid them, what we can learn from them.
Absolutely, and that makes that a bit more of a discussion and having a bit of a chat about it. Really good.
And hopefully some good buy-in from the students, like if they realize these are live results from them and their class, like, you know, this isn't just a generic student, this is someone in our class, or, you know, multiple of us in our class that have had this same assumption or area to work on. And, you know, we mentioned we've got these different types of assessments, readiness, summative. I also mentioned being able to copy and do multiple assessments. So if you do end up with multiple, using that compare results to look at this as a pre-test or a readiness, and then putting it side by side with a midpoint formative or a summative at the end, and really being able to track the growth of the class, the students, and even getting really individual breakdowns, like even for students that have done amazingly and seen huge change, there's still always things that you as a teacher might want to know, what's the next steps for the student, or even for that student, if you're conferencing with them, having a talk with them as well, what could they do next? You know, celebrate their huge wins and then look at how can they build on that and go even further.
I loved this particular area for parent-teacher conversations as well. It is so factual, and as you were saying, you can highlight the areas that they're doing really well in, but also talk about progressing forward to allow more growth for that student.
Yeah, and I know I always almost like rapidly scroll to the bottom of this screen because I always wanted to know as a teacher, like if I was getting towards that summative area, am I ready to move on? Do I have time or space to revisit anything, or anything I need to circle back around to later before potentially exams or end of year? Like, where has the pre to post seen the most impact in teaching? And for the ones that might have the least amount of change, is it because the student's settling out in the test, or is it because there's a few more actions that I could take? So like for homologous chromosomes, you know, that's still sitting the lowest here with the least amount of change. What could I do to maybe work on that further, what time do I have? And then maybe if I don't have much time, maybe where can I focus as well?
Absolutely.
Wow, I think that covers a huge range of what we can cover in terms of assessments. I'm just going to jump back to where we were a bit earlier there. And this takes us right back to what we're looking at before, our assessment wheel. So I feel like we're pretty well looked at lots of different examples of the readiness, formative and summative, and a couple different ways that we've used, I guess, like Digitech just as an example of a quick build of a test.
Absolutely, absolutely. And tidying it all off with the reporting that EP gives you just to pull it all together. Yep.
Wonderful. I think that's pretty much all we've really got time for. I feel like we've really gone into the weeds really quickly with the time we've got, but I do want to say thank you for chatting with me today, Grace, about assessments and our sort of passion areas around assessments, and for anybody watching today as well.
Same. Thanks so much, Kirsty, for taking us and showing us what it actually looks like on the platform. Thanks.